Leroy Lemons.
We are in the third series involving divine math. So last time we left off with 7. Let's begin tonight with the number 8. Which, in my opinion, clearly indicates renewal, or the inauguration of something completely new. Just look at the pattern. There were 8 people to reboot the earth after the flood. 8. Renewal. Circumcision was to occur on the 8th day. That's not a coincidence. Not the 5th day, not the 10th day, the 8th day. It meant that you were now newly inaugurated into the Israelite community as a male. Renewal. Something new. A new relationship. A new status. There are 8 candles on the Hanukkah menorah instead of 7 to commemorate the rededication of the temple after it had been desolated and besmirched and defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV. And I think the rededication of the temple happened around 164, 165, somewhere in there, BC. Hanukkah is found in the intertestamental books of what they call the Deuterocanon. We, in the Protestant church, by and large, do not accept them as canonical. We call that section of books the Apocrypha. So 1st Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees discusses these events. Jesus observed the Feast of Dedication. We read in the New Testament that involved the commemoration of Hanukkah. And so the rededication of the temple, the renewal of the temple, as signified by the 8 candles. Jesus rose on the day after the 7th day, i.e. the 8th day, if you want to look at it like that. Renewal, resurrection. And the Beast of Revelation is one of 7 previous Caesars, we said last week, and will be an 8th. The idea of a rebirth, a reconstituting of this evil entity, however you want to look at it. He was alive, is not alive, John said. Will be, again, alive. Was, is not, will be. One of his heads was crushed as if dead, but it came back to life. You have at least 3 different ways in which the Bible indicates that the Antichrist, whoever this is somebody who had lived prior to John writing Revelation, was dead at the time and would live again. He was of the 7 Caesars, the previous Caesars, in a line of succession of Caesars, historically, but would be again in the future, maybe the far distant future, an 8th. The idea of coming after the 7. A inauguration of a new world order. Something new. 8. Okay, let's now talk about our next number, which is, that's not very good, 0, 10. 10 is the number that indicates completeness or perfection, perhaps in terms of earthly things in particular. For instance, we all have, at least most of us, have 10 fingers and 10 toes to make a complete set. When the baby is born, and the doctor looks at the numbers of fingers and toes with the baby that's just been born, he or she will say, perfect, complete. 10. There were 10 plagues of Egypt, which symbolized the complete and perfect disruption and destruction of the Egyptian pantheon of gods. 10 means complete. There are the 10 commandments to make a complete set of the Decalogue. The idea of completion. There are 10 crowns on the future beast of Revelation and a 10-king confederation, which indicates a complete world empire, not just a regional empire like we have seen up to this point. There's never been in world history a complete worldwide empire except for maybe the one at Babel with Nimrod. So the 10 represents the complete rule of the complete world under Antichrist. So again, completion under earthly terms may be what 10 is getting at. It may interest you to know, by the way, that we are currently awaiting the sacrifice of the 10th red heifer. There have been 9, from what I've read, sacrificed thus far. And according to the Orthodox Jews who live in Israel today, who are members of the organization that's wanting to rebuild the temple, that is a third temple, they have imported red heifers from Texas, and they are waiting to see if there will be even one white hair to show up on these female cows that are right now perfectly red. Every hair is red. The Bible talks about the red heifer, the ashes of a heifer. And the thinking is that in order to cleanse or purify this renewed temple, this rebuilt temple, assuming that's what ends up taking place, they're going to have to sprinkle it with the ashes of this heifer. Well, 9 have been used thus far over time since the first red heifer was sacrificed thousands of years ago. This would be the 10th. I don't know if you had read about this, but during Passover of this year, there were many who surmised that they were going to sacrifice the red heifer this past Passover. From what I understand, that has not yet happened. Interesting, though, it's a possibility in the near future. So, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, 10 does represent completeness and perfection. We talked about 7 with the idea of 7 representing fullness, abundance, perhaps fullness in terms of the supernatural influence or supernatural direction. 10 may indicate that idea on earthly terms. The second thing I would say about 10 is that it seems to be used as a force multiplier. For instance, we learned that 4 becomes 40 and 400. Multiples with 10 being the multiple there, the variable. 7 becomes 70, as in the 70 nations, the table of nations in Genesis. The 70 members of Jacob's family who entered Egypt. The 70 elders of Israel. The 70 disciples sent out by Jesus on a mission. 12 becomes 120. Again, multiplied by 10. 10 is a force multiplier. The 120 disciples in the upper room at Pentecost, right? And then 10 becomes 1,000 if you multiply 10 times 10 times 10. Now, by the way, a number to the third power, what do we call that? Cubed, right? So, 10 times 10 times 10 . Another way to look at that By the way, what does that equal? $1,000, okay? Another way to draw that formula would be 10 to the third power. We call that cubed. 10 cubed is 1,000. The New Jerusalem is, as it happens, in the shape of a cube. It is as long as it is wide as it is tall. Could the shape of this city be a mathematical message indicating either A, the Trinity, 3, in its perfection, which is what 10 means, or B, the completion, 10, of the Trinity's work on earth, as 10 may represent the idea of completion or perfection as it concerns things on earth. Speculation. Interesting. Okay, let's now move to the next and final major number we'll be dealing with. 12. I believe 12 may indicate, and I think others have observed this as well, the idea of earthly order or organization. Earthly order. And remember, what is the opposite of order? Very good. Chaos. Remember that the very first of the Bible, the Lord is seen conquering chaos in verse 2 of the Bible. He's bringing order out of chaos. And so there are 12 months in a year. Temporal order. The 12 tribes of Jacob. National order or organization. The 12 apostles of the church. Ecclesiastical order. The New Jerusalem that we said was in the shape of a cube. I'm not sure how to do justice to this. Let's see. That's fairly close. The New Jerusalem in the shape of a cube is 12,000, I think it's cubits, no, stadia. 12,000 stadia this way, 12,000 this way, and I should have gone probably better to go up an up arrow. High, and then deep, I guess is sort of kind of hard to show. Depth. All right. 12,000 times 12,000 times 12,000 stadia. There's a 12 in there. As if to signal to our minds the idea of order on steroids because it's times 1,000. There are 12 gates in this city, named after the 12 tribes of Israel. 12. There are 12 foundation stones underneath the city, named after the 12 apostles of the Lamb. If 12 is the number indicating order on earth, and order is the exact opposite of chaos, then the New Jerusalem, which is a picture, by the way, of the redeemed in the eternal state. We know that because John says, and I, John, saw the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, adorned as a bride for her husband. It's a picture of the church in that age, descending to its new residence of the new earth. The new earth. Okay, so just keep all that in mind. If 12 is the number indicating order on earth, and order is the exact opposite of chaos, then the New Jerusalem, which is a picture of the redeemed in the eternal state, is meant to convey, that is, the New Jerusalem is meant to convey the total absence of chaos for eternity. No turmoil, no cancer, no death, no recriminations, no temptation, no chaos monster trolling the seas. Instead, a perfectly ordered existence back to the Edenic idea. 12. Okay, that's our last main number. But now we want to look at a couple of more sections in this divine math lesson. Let's talk about division. And here, we're mainly going to be dividing by 2. So let's take 10, cut it in half. 10, which means completeness, divided by 2 is 5. Had people ask me in the last couple of weeks, hey, you skipped 5. You never talked about 5. Well, here you go. So if 10 means completeness, what do you think 5 might mean? Maybe incompleteness, right? Imperfect. Instead of 10 fingers, you got 5. It's interesting that when Jesus fed the large crowd, at least in one of these stories about feeding the large crowd, he was presented with 5 loaves. That may have been a mathematical message to us that he was presented with a seemingly incomplete or insufficient amount of food to feed this huge number, this huge gathering. And yet it was more than sufficient. We're told in Revelation that these locusts that ascend out of the bottomless pit will torture those who have taken the mark of the beast for 5 months. That to me suggests an incomplete amount of time. And in other words, the idea of a temporary period may be what's meant there. Now, after I've already written all this, I came across a 19th century Lutheran scholar, Ernst Hengstenberg, guess what country he's from, who also believed that 5 was to, quote, signify a part or a portion of the complete number 10, and thus to symbolize an incomplete period, end of quote. So it's nice to find somebody smarter than me that actually agreed with what I thought might be the case. Okay, let's take a look as we continue with division. Let's divide 7. That's an important number we've discovered, perhaps the most important number in the Bible. And what happens when we cut that in half? 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. Well, that's a weird number. And yet, how often we come across it. For instance, and remember that we said that 7 represents fullness under divine influence, supernatural influence. Sometimes the good guys, sometimes the bad. Supernatural good guys, supernatural bad guys, right? The devil has his 7, but for the most part, 7 is something that is connected with Yahweh God and what he's doing in his time, the message he's trying to convey about this 7th day rest period, what that really is getting to. We said that 7 represented the fullness of time, the eschatological rest, the end time rest period, the messianic rule, a time of ultimate peace. We talked about it representing abundance, as if you're full during the Thanksgiving meal. Okay? 7 is where God sits and dwells in 7. That's where you want to be, with God, in that time of 7. Well, if you cut that in half, you might think, based on cutting 10 in half, what that meant, that it's the exact opposite of what 7 represents. And sure enough, 3.5 does in fact represent the opposite. For instance, Israel's drought during the ministry of Elijah, which was brought on by Israel's rebellion against God, lasted 3.5 years. Antiochus' reign of terror against Israel in about 167 BC, where he defiled the temple and killed a lot of Jews, lasted 3.5 years. The little horn, who many believe represents the beast in the end times, the little horn's rule in Daniel lasts a time times and half a time. So a year plus 2 years plus half a year's 3.5 years. So again, the little horn, which many believe, is a description of the future, what we would call Antichrist, based on what Daniel says about him. His reign of terror is going to last 3.5 years. The man of lawlessness in Daniel breaks a 7-year covenant, so 7 cut in half is 3.5 years. He breaks the 7-year covenant at the midpoint of that, which is the 3.5-year mark. The beast of Revelation, we're told in the book of Revelation, holds sway for exactly 3.5 years. The 2 witnesses of Revelation bring disasters on the people of earth, the unbelieving people of the earth, in response to man's rebellion for 3.5 years. So can we say that the dividing of 7 is a symbol of man's rebellion? The exact opposite of what we'll see in the Messianic age of peace and rest. I think so. All right. We've talked about division. Let's finish up this lesson with multiplication. Multiplication. Okay. The tree of life in Revelation 22 is said to produce 12 fruits and will produce those 12 fruits each month for 12 months. That means 12 times 12. What is that? Interesting. 144 times the 1,000-year reign of Christ that we read about in Revelation is 144,000. Isn't that interesting? The sealed servants in Revelation 7 number 144,000 Israelites. So, the question is, are all these numbers meant to be connected in our minds? And if so, what are they supposed to signify? That is up to each of us to contemplate. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. Divine math is like earthly math. It's not always easy to calculate. There are so many equations and so many variables one must work through to get to a clear-cut answer. In spite of this, I hope that we've provided enough clues in this study that point to how God utilized numbers within the biblical text so that we're better informed of the underlying messages He intended to impart. And with that, we will conclude the lesson on divine math.